we want to welcome Chris Audette and thank you, Chris, for agreeing to give us this talk on our stormwater management, which is a very important thing, given that climate change is going to be increasing the severity and the frequency of high rainfall and high melt events, which can do a lot of damage to infrastructure as well as to streams and waterways. Uh, he is the director of the Waterman Conservation Education Center, and I also want to give a word of appreciation for him and his staff and volunteers that help take care of all those properties, including the Waterman property itself on Hilton Road, sorry, in Appalachian, along with their center, which they give good educational camp programs for children, as well as some events for adults. And then all the other properties, including the IBM Glen, what loosely is referred to as Harriet's Marsh. It's actually formerly called the Appalachian Marsh, and then the Hiawatha Island.
We're actually yet to unveil a trail we recently named after Harriet Marcy.
Oh, good. That's going to be nice.
So look for that relatively soon.
Very good. And then there's a place I haven't been to, Pettus Hill, I guess, in West Windsor. I haven't been there yet. I wasn't aware of it until I just looked up the website for Waterman just about a half an hour ago, and reviewed what they have. And I forgot if I mentioned IBM Glen, but IBM Glen is a huge property that takes a tremendous amount of work to take care of, and they did a fantastic job again here treating the hemlocks. There's a lot of old growth hemlocks there that were in danger of being killed by the invasive pest called the woolly adelgid, and they raised money and with volunteer help treated I think it was 500 something trees, and that's a massive effort. Plus they had to cut down dying ash trees that were being killed by the emerald ash borer. So that was another massive effort. So thank you for all that work. And now I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about whatever you'd like to mention regarding the upcoming events or Waterman Conservation Center, and then to proceed to your talk. Thank you.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much, Valdi. I want to point out that the Sierra Club and your membership certainly did your part in terms of helping to raise funds for the hemlock treatments in honor of the late great Dick Andrus. We're actually shooting to finish up that treatment this Friday. Our last 50 trees, and we'll hit somewhere between 400 and 500. Let's see, I mentioned the garlic mustard pulling contest, so that's coming up May 1st. The actually Father's Day weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, will be having a native plant sale hosted by Farmer Brown's Market. So we'll have Waterman staff and Waterman volunteers out there educating about the importance of native plants, the function they can play in your landscaping, and why you want to choose those rather than various ornamentals. And of course, we are currently enrolling for both of our summer youth camps. They're day camps. They run from 9 to 3. Residents of the town of Owego and its hamlets are eligible for a free program, which is more recreation based. And then we also have a tuition $200 a week camp called Waterman Explore, which is going to focus in this year on outdoor skills, orienteering, beneficial plants, harmful plants, supervised campfire building. So lots going on. But today I'm here to talk about upstream thinking and downstream effects. Valdi's absolutely correct that we already have our issues in terms of stormwater management, stormwater infrastructure, and it's only going to get worse. I'm going to talk more about the current picture, weaknesses in the current paradigm, and some strategies that, if adopted widely, can take a big bite out of these problems. Of course, thank you very much to Sierra Club, Scott, Valdi, Chris Arasta for inviting me to give this talk. I'm so happy to be considered an expert. I've been Waterman's director for just around 3 years. We're going into number 4. I studied biology and fish and wildlife technology at Paul Smith College. And I have experience in sustainable agriculture in Malawi and Zambia. I, of course, have a vested interest in teaching future leaders about conserving the environment. But today I'm going to give you a crash course on stream ecology. As you can see on the map, we are located, let's see if I can get my pointer, there we go. We are right at the beginning of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The things that we do here impacts everything below us. And of course, if we work really hard and, out in the James watershed, they don't work very hard, our work is going to be impacted. And of course, it works the other way around. That's what I mean by downstream thinking. So we'll go through some definitions. I'm going to talk about the current stormwater picture, what has happened as a result of poor stormwater management or shortcomings of current systems. What can we do better in terms of Waterman and the world, the Chesapeake Bay watershed, all watersheds? What can we do better? And then we can have a discussion at the very end. All right. Let's mull through some definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. So what is stormwater? Basically just water running or pooled came from storm event. Impounded means water that's held somewhere or dammed. Infiltration is just how water enters the ground. Erosion is the process where soil is removed by flowing water for our purposes. Yes, there are other types of erosion. I'll talk about particulate. Generally small solid fragments. They may be dissolved, they might be suspended in the water. They could be made of minerals or they could be made of organic matter. And from there, we break it down into particulate organic matter and dissolved organic matter and some other categories as well. Sedimentation is the process where particulate settles and it might cover habitat, it might fill crevices. It's basically just the deposition of eroded material. Channelization, typically deepening, usually straightening of a channel or a riverbed. Nutrient loading and eutrophication. It's the addition of compounds that promote plant growth, basically fertilization. And eutrophication is the limnology term of how that process happens in nature. Dissolved oxygen, basically oxygen available to life in water. Oxygen is available in the atmosphere, and it also dissolves down into water. The colder the water, the more oxygen it can hold. Biodiversity, basically the number of different species and the abundance of those individuals. It's a relationship there in any discrete area geographically and amount of time. Pervious or permeable refers to a substance that water can flow through. Again, for our purposes, we're talking about water. Bioretention is a planted landscape feature that can capture and store stormwater with the eventual goal of dispersing it and returning it to groundwater or evaporating it. And those processes are either infiltration or evapotranspiration, which is the next term. which is a fancy word just to talk about water moving through plants, coming out through the leaves. All plants move water through their biomass through that mechanism. Something that is lipophilic is able to dissolve in fat, and for our purposes, we're talking about usually contaminants like BPA or mercury, that sort of thing. Bioaccumulation is the process where some kind of a contaminant or toxin increases in composition as you move through a food chain. There's a little bit in, say, the plankton that a minnow eats. You get to the minnow level, there's a higher concentration. You get to a game fish level, and if we're talking about something like mercury, then you have a problem when it reaches your table. And hydrocarbons are usually petroleum, and we're talking about things like motor oil, gas, kerosene, that type of stuff. Wow, that was a lot of information. I'm going to reward you. What an adorable kitten. As we go through things here, we need to take a break every now and then. All right, so how is stormwater currently managed? In terms of our houses, we're talking about things like ditches and drains and gutters. We're looking at basically taking water and moving it away from property to avoid damage. So we have our drippy gutters, we have our overwhelmed ditches, and eventually we want to get it out of here. So it's going into a municipal ditch, it's going into a storm sewer, maybe it's going to a combined sewer. But basically we're handing off that problem. And it might be a little bit of water, it might be a lot of water, it might be a little bit of sediment, it might be a lot. You know, it depends on where it's coming from and the practices on that particular property. Now I will acknowledge that this graphic is probably a worst case scenario and a bit of an exaggeration, but it gets the point across. Similar themes in terms of the current paradigm municipally, though we are moving in better directions in terms of implementing you know, more realistic infrastructure, more robust infrastructure, and green infrastructure. But impervious surfaces abound. We have lots of asphalt. We have lots of roofs. We have lots of aging ditches and essentially ways just to move water and daylight it and get it to a waterway as fast as possible so that we're preserving life, we're preserving property, but we're also ending up with very fast moving water that has lots of stuff in it. And those are the two biggest problems. I also want to talk about turf. You know, it isn't really what we think about when we're talking about impervious surfaces, but if you're looking at a wide swath of, you know, monocultural grass that has a lot of thatch under it, it's shedding more water than it's absorbing. But that being said, there are ways to apply turf in sustainable ways. What are the effects of poor stormwater management? So in general, poor stormwater management results in poor infiltration, which creates a rapid surface flow that results in a negative impact. So all of the negative effects I'm going to talk about feed into one another and self-perpetuate and create ecological problems and create infrastructure problems too, and flooding and that kind of thing. So first I'm going to talk about salination and contaminants. We know that runoff from roadways, parking lots often has lots of bad stuff in it. road salt, the hydrocarbons, metals, toxic compounds, pesticides, all of that. Residential and agriculture areas can have all of that, and also more fertilizer, more pesticide. In the case of storm sewers and treatment works, even after treatment, antibiotics enter our waterways at documented levels. We've demonstrated that even at headwater streams in the Adirondacks, we can culture antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Now, the importation and accumulation of these compounds affects the number of species that can survive, either by killing them directly, they might degrade the habitat, they might have their own demand for oxygen. And of course, in the case of things like metals and lipophilic toxins, there's definitely implications for bioaccumulation. Yikes. Let's look at some cute goats. This gets very heavy. You know, these are real world problems, and they stretch beyond just that's a polluted stream or shucks, it's unfortunate that it flooded so much. You know, there are long-term impacts that we see right in our backyard. Another issue, while channelization isn't necessarily a result of poor stormwater management, it's integral to it. Yeah, it initially was an effort towards stormwater management, usually looking to avoid flooding, but still more or less exporting a problem downstream. The unintended consequences of channelization is less diversity of habitat, generally an increase in temperature, scouring of the bottom, and it can make the effects of other processes even worse. So we have the channelized state on the left versus a natural meandering stream that cycles through different flow patterns on the right. Here we have the Grand Canyon and an up and comer, the drainage ditch beside Hilton Road in Appalachian, New York. This is probably the most severe section of our drainage ditch, but it's getting deep. The town's doing its best by adding rocks and riprap, but you know, we have a utility pole that's about to fold right over. Same process that created the Grand Canyon is scouring sand and silt and soil away from our watershed and transporting it to our rivers and waterways. Obviously, if it's powerful enough to dig out a canyon, it's powerful enough to have a substantial impact on our infrastructure. So erosion directly contributes to sedimentation and nutrient loading in streams. Stormwater entering a waterway might be turbid, which is discolored with particulates. And these particulates may or may not carry fertilizer. They certainly have a fraction of organic matter and other things that decompose and take up oxygen, or they promote things like algae blooms, which we'll talk about their issues in a minute. And I wanted to note that even well-managed stormwater that's received primary treatment municipally can still contribute to nutrient loading. You know, even if we take the particulate out, you know, even if we give it some kind of treatment, you can never take out all of the nitrogen and phosphorus. So what this causes is in aquatic systems, naturally, over quite a lot of time, they go through a process called eutrophication. The systems tend to become more productive, but over a very long time. Stormwater pollution is a key factor in accelerating eutrophication. This results in a boost in biomass from algae blooms, from the growth of something called periphyton, which is like algae that grows on the surface, and other aquatic vegetation. But this boom in growth isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable by the system. Eventually, it eats up all the nutrients and it dies back. After it dies back, it decomposes. The process of decomposition, as I said, robs the system of oxygen, and we see a decrease in biodiversity, and it contributes to fish kills like I show in the pictures. And here, if you start seeing catfish and bullhead dying from anoxia, you've got a problem. They practically can crawl up on the bank and breathe themselves. So algae blooms aren't the end of it in terms of sedimentation. There's also the issue of just the sheer material entering the stream bed. It can alter the topography of the stream bottom. It decreases the diversity. It homogenizes the bottom of the stream, which isn't compatible for diverse life. In essence, this is habitat loss. We lose opportunity for fish breeding, either through inappropriate bottom and breeding habitat, or through silt being deposited on fish eggs after they're laid, and essentially smothering them. It decreases dissolved oxygen, and as stream channels fill in, it's the opposite of channelization. There's implications for flooding, scouring of inappropriate areas, and then further erosion, and it becomes a cycle. Also, the darker the bottom and the shallower the stream, the warmer it is. And that's one of the things that's led to the collapse of a lot of our cold water fisheries in Adirondack headwater streams, and that's why we're not seeing these heritage strains of brook trout anymore. So this is a very scientific graph that I took data from Audette and all yesterday morning. But I'm just trying to demonstrate that as I go to try to point with my finger, as storm flow enters the stream over the course of a few days, the water comes in at a high rate and that tapers off. What this does is we also see, as the water is entering, we see an increase in dissolved and particulate organic matter. And we can use this as an indicator of other contaminants entering as well. And then predictably, over time, as that material decomposes and starts demanding oxygen, we see dissolved oxygen fall off over time. So the cascade of all of these effects flow into one another, and I refer to it as a vicious cycle of stormwater pollution. The water immediately becomes contaminated or saltier. We also see the influx of nutrients and particular organic matter, causes algae blooms, and sedimentation. We see lower oxygen, higher temperature. This results in fewer organisms and lower biodiversity. And then we cycle through it again. And with lower biodiversity, less diverse habitat, the system's already more vulnerable to the next wave. It's a baby piglet. uh, so what can we do better? We know that there are distinct benefits to exporting water from our houses. You know, water in the basement and soggy infrastructure is never a good thing. We know that water needs to be taken away from places where people live in municipalities to protect business and life. But we also know that doing it as quickly as possible and as ruthlessly as we can, and dumping it right into rivers also has consequences. So let's talk about sustainable stormwater management and Waterman's Green Innovation Grant Project. So let's go through the current conditions at our Interpretive Center property. You know, can you identify the problems in these photographs? You know, going clockwise, we'll revisit my favorite utility pole, and you can see the amount of material that's been scoured away. We'll move on to kind of an intermediate drainage ditch that's meandered its way actually into the forest and removed topsoil. A little bit further down that ditch, we have a plunge pool that's further eroding. We have our driveway, which even shows erosion of blacktop, and that breakdown of water sheeting over it over and over and over again. We have our current parking lot, which impounds water and then eventually sends large volumes of silty water down into our drainage system. And then we have the Hilton Road ditch that just shunts that directly to the Susquehanna. So it's not a perfect system. It's certainly not the worst system, but it can be improved upon. Our land sits, at least where the building is between hundreds of acres of forest on a slope coming towards us and the ditch. You know, we're basically the last stand. And our infrastructure isn't really adequate. You know, it's designed to handle the 4 acres that the building stands on. It's not really designed to address all of this water coming off the slope. So how are we going to make it better? We have obtained a grant through the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation through a program called the Green Innovation Grant Program. The money comes from the New York State Clean Water Revolving Fund, and we've also secured funding from additional local foundations. So we're going to overhaul our drainage system and incorporate several green practices that work with nature rather than against it, that utilize natural processes to try to encourage water to go into the ground, to move through soil vertically rather than over its surface, which inherently provides better infiltration, or better filtration, and recharges groundwater and doesn't contribute as much to the rise of rivers and flood events. We're going to employ a demonstration park sort of format. And it's going to feature 4 different types of pervious pavement in a new parking lot, so people can see how each of those types of pavement holds up over time, and how it functions and how it looks aesthetically. And we'll also speak to the cost of installation for all of that. We're going to have vegetated retention and detention ponds, also known as rain gardens. There'll also be, everything will be linked by planted swales. So basically ditches that are either lined and protected with stone, but also planted with wetland plants. So we have the benefit of the roots holding soil and also filtering contaminants. We're going to implement some stormwater reuse, also known as downspout disconnection. So that can be as simple as a rain barrel. We're hoping to install a system where our roof water is stored in a cistern and then used to flush our toilets. It's a project that was actually implemented at the Carrier Dome to a much, much larger scale. We're going to install a green roof. So instead of shooting water off of shingles through a gutter system and into a drain, we're going to install a roof on a demonstration pavilion that absorbs water and has plants to utilize it. And everything is going to flow down into an engineered wetland out by Hilton Road that will sequester water in those really protracted and severe rainstorms, with the ultimate goal of not exporting water from our property into that overutilized and degrading town infrastructure. So there are various types of pervious pavement. Like I mentioned, that ranges up from asphalt and concrete products to PVC cells that stabilize gravel or stabilize turf. There's also, more traditional patio paver sorts of products that are also pervious. But I wanted to show you this video from the EFC of a front end loader just unloading gallons and gallons of water onto pervious pavement, and you can watch it just disappear. I apologize for the camera work at the end. But it reflects, and exactly, all gone. It's quite remarkable. Underneath pervious pavement is usually several feet of crushed stone and a basin to collect that water and keep it there until it has a chance to infiltrate in the ground. There'll usually be an overflow as well in case that that basin is filled up, but it really takes a strong rain for that to happen. Another option is, if you're forced to go with a shallow basin, you can have that overflow pipe go into bioretention or biodetention, which is kind of like a small wetland. You utilize very coarse planting medium, again, to promote infiltration, but then you're using plant roots to hold the water, to hold the soil. And then, of course, the process of evapotranspiration to pull the water up into the atmosphere. So it's either going back into the air or into the ground and not into the river. I want to show a picture of the Carrier Dome project. This is their cistern, this immense tank. And it captures water off the roof, and that's, if you in the glorious future happen to attend an event at the Carrier Dome and you use the facilities, you're flushing with rainwater. Hopefully at the center we'll be doing the same thing soon, more as a demonstration than a real gain in terms of stormwater. But of course, the humble rain barrel is probably the most accessible green stormwater practice that anybody can implement. Some novel uses of recaptured stormwater, in addition to flushing toilets, is ice rinks. public complexes can waste much less potable water if they capture the roof, the drip off of the roof to propagate their ice rink. But even to just taking your downspout out of the drain that it goes into and pointing it to a rain garden can be hugely beneficial. Green roofs, I think, are probably one of the most self-explanatory technologies that we're implementing. But I wanted to emphasize that it's it's beyond that neglected corner of your roof where the maple overhangs and it's growing 4 inches of moss. It's a very specifically engineered layer that is separated from the roof by durable waterproof material. Sedum is a favorite plant that's used in green roofs, and it's very fast draining media. Usually they're designed to hold a certain amount of water before they start draining, and oftentimes they can absorb impressive number of gallons and utilize it for growth before it has to drain down a pipe or a gutter. And I want to show the process of constructing a wetland and then the final product. And it's just the amount of surface area in a wetland for things like growth, for evapotranspiration, and just root mass is spectacular. We should not discount the fact that all of this vegetation is certainly something of a carbon sink. But in nature, we know wetlands function like a reservoir or a sponge. They absorb and store water during times of abundance and then release it gradually. Natural wetlands also catch sediment. While they may not use nutrients rapidly, they will sequester them for some time, and they will filter out contaminants. The same thing applies to our engineered stormwater wetland. And it'll function similar to the bioretention pools that I mentioned, but it'll be kind of that terminal sequestration stage. It's our last ditch before it starts going down the actual ditch. And of course, we'll have a diversity of plants that will serve as educational tools. They'll help purify water. We'll have the benefit of evapotranspiration and erosion prevention. All right, let's discuss. So how can we benefit from this technology? How can we make sure that it's implemented? Because if Waterman and Binghamton City Hall and a handful of other organizations do these projects and tout how fancy they are, really what's the impact on the Chesapeake Bay watershed? What we need is solid adoption, maybe not of all of these techniques, but at least of some of them. How do we incentivize these practices? How do we make them more accessible? So of course, GIGP, other revolving fund programs are available to organizations and municipalities, but what about homeowners and businesses? What grassroots steps can we promote to our neighbors? How do we say you put in a rain barrel? How do you get your neighbor to do it? And what can you do right now besides install a rain barrel? You could install 5 rain barrels. You could plant a rain garden in that spot in your yard where water runs over it, where you can never mow, or you can disconnect a downspout and direct it to that garden. It's going to be less water that runs off your property. And similarly, you can create kind of a bioretention gully or ditch between your property and where it exits. But I want to say a few thanks, and then let's talk about these discussion questions. Of course, if you'd like more information about the Waterman Center or the GIGP project, please visit www.watermancenter.org. If you type the / and GIGP afterwards, you'll get a rundown of this project. But thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to the Susquehanna Group for hosting. I have to thank the Environmental Facilities Corporation for the funding for the project. Similarly, thanks to the Mildred Faulkner Truman Foundation, the Community Foundation, and BAE Electric Systems for providing funding, or supporting funds, I should say, for the grant. Thank you to Delta Engineers for their project design and guidance. And thanks to all Waterman volunteers and members, past, present, and future. We couldn't do anything without your labor and without your support. We're always looking for more volunteers and more members. But go back to the discussion page and let's go ahead and try to open the chat and open the floor.
Yeah, Kevin Millar has something in the chat.
I'll just unmute myself.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
What do you mean by primary treatment of stormwater?
Primary treatment and different levels of treatment. I'm talking about municipal stormwater treatment. Primary is generally more removal of debris, removal of solids, whereas secondary treatment is more on a level of decontamination and that sort of thing, and chemical treatment. Municipal systems, some implement a separation between a dedicated storm sewer and a sanitary sewer, and some are a combined storm and sanitary. And each has drawbacks and benefits. A dedicated storm sewer is going to send runoff right into the stream, whereas combined, theoretically, there's some level of treatment. But if there's a failure of a combined system, then you have a more catastrophic problem in terms of what's entering the waterway.
Chris, your project for the stormwater retention at Hilton Road sounds very interesting. And I might have missed this, but what, other than sending runoff down into the river, though, are you trying to take care of? I mean, you've got a lot of forested land there, and you've got a parking lot. I doubt if you're sending bad stuff, other than maybe the parking lot, towards the river. So anyways, what can you tell us more about that?
Sure. My primary concern in terms of what Waterman contributes as a quote unquote polluter is the amount of sediment that comes off our property, but more especially the amount of sediment that is removed from that drainage ditch because of the energy from the water that we're sending off of our property. The less we export and the less that we stress that infrastructure, the less we're contributing directly to sedimentation.
Okay, so it's generally sedimentation. I get it.
Yep.
All right, and you got a steep slope, so that's the speed of the runoff you're concerned with.
Absolutely, absolutely. I see Robbie E raised their hand. I'd like to call on that question.
Yes, Chris. I would like to see little demonstration plots for people to act responsibly with like growing their lawn and how much of that Scott's fertilizer winds up in the streams and what we can do about it. Garden plots, what happens to the topsoil and the fertilizer. That nice cute pig you showed. Any pin to pat, especially the way they grow pork, it's terrible on the streams.
Absolutely. I'd go an extra step, and it would be interesting if we could take a say we encase single animals requirements in a plexiglass soil enclosure, and we have a little tap at the corner of it, and we can take samples and show how much nitrogen is coming off of that. It would also be interesting if we could put one of those in front of effective buffer strip and show the impact of that practice. But I agree, pork farming is probably one of the worst in terms of both water pollution and carbon.
And our clay soils compound the problem.
They certainly do. Yes.
I wonder if you can't do demonstration plots, they'd have to be very small size, but educational films set up somewhere.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I intend to have cross sections of the permeable pavement that people can take a picture and pour water on top of and see how that moves through. In terms of kind of long-term effect of fertilization and that sort of thing on topsoil, and boy, I've seen it abroad in a big way, but it would be complicated and take some time, but it'd be worthwhile doing. We just have to find a spot to do it.
You said in a sod lawn, I think you said something about in downpour that most of that runs off.
Yep. Yeah, and that's
correct?
that's another I'm sure sampling has been done off of residential drains. But it'd be kind of cool in maybe the lower portion of our interpretive property to set up some plots. Now, one thing I neglected to mention was I talked about the gravel cells for permeable paving. There are also sod cells that help preserve that infiltration. And also makes it more durable. So you could even use grass as a parking surface, and that you'll see at our interpretive center. I want to move on to Valdi, who raised his hand as well, though. But these were very interesting points, Robbie. Go ahead, Valdi.
So I'm piggybacking off of what Robbie brought up, and it just sparked some ideas in my head. It seems to me that people like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Susquehanna, watershed, Delaware watershed. I think some legislation should be somehow worked on here. Big sources. Agriculture is massive. If we could provide some type of incentive for farmers to provide this type of systems to slow down what comes out of their pastures, and maybe what goes into, even filter what goes into their, maybe they have a farm pond that their animals drink out of, and that'll help them keep that cleaner as well. So there are things that can be done, but maybe farmers don't want to do it because they're paying a lot of tax money on every, square foot of their property. If they could maybe trade off, okay, if you have something related to stormwater management, maybe that acreage can be reduced in terms of how it's assessed in property taxes. Maybe there's that type of an idea. And then another thing.
Well, the Waterman would sign on in support of that legislature in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Please, go on.
Sure. And then things like schools. I mean, schools have huge properties and they have massive roofs, big parking lots and driveways. They are another prime culprit here that somehow, maybe when we build something new, some legislation should be put in to add this type of thing into their design. Green roof is another thing that could be done in a school. They typically have flat roofs anyway.
Agreed. All of this infrastructure we're revisiting could certainly be refangled to incorporate green practices. And yeah, schools have immense properties and huge roofs and big facilities, and no time to write the kind of funding proposals required to access this technology. So why don't we just build it right in? I'm right on the same page.
Yeah, and the same thing if somebody wants to build a new mall or a new business or something like that. This should be factored in right at the beginning as the proposal, and the plan submission and approval, but prior to them starting a building, being approved for a building permit. So this sparks a huge amount of ideas here, just in a little bit of thinking, and this would benefit the communities too, because it would actually lower the amount of taxes people have to pay for repair of culverts, bridges that might otherwise get washed out, damage to roadsides. I mean, this is, there could, in the long run, be huge savings here, and so there's many things that can be helped with this. So I don't know why we haven't done this before. Perhaps because this doesn't seem sexy. It's like, talking about stormwater. Well, what's so exciting about that? But you gave this presentation here, and wow, that's it really, there's a lot to it here. It's not just water running down a drain and then you don't have to worry about it afterwards. There's consequences to this. So pollution, erosion,
Precisely.
damage, infrastructure, all of it. So thank you for giving us this presentation. I hope that other people have other ideas here too. I'm going to stop talking here, but I mean, I'm glad we're recording this, because this should be shown to some legislators. So thank you.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. The EFC does a great job, but they could, goodness, they could use more funding, right? In terms of promoting this sort of project. Yeah. We're planning on breaking ground late summer, early fall. So absolutely keep an eye on this project. Come visit the construction site. Stay in touch. This is really exciting. I hope to chronicle the whole process and document it through our website and social media. We'll have an official press conference coming up probably early mid-June as we go out to bid for contractors, and of course the Sierra Club will be invited to stand with us as an organization that drafted a letter of support as we announce this incredible project, unprecedented in Waterman's history.
one other thing I wanted to mention too uh, is that highways, when they're designed, can be designed better as far as the stormwater that runs off of them too. I've seen construction projects where they have uh, little mini retention inside the ditches with appropriate things that you might find in a swamp, cattails, some type of reeds growing there, and that slows down the flow and it provides some diversity right alongside the roadside as well. So there's things that can be done from that aspect as well.
Yes, yeah. Even one issue, one shortcoming with permeable asphalt is that if there's a lot of turning and kind of torsional force on it, it can break up because it doesn't have that finishing, very hard, durable course on top of it. So if there's an application, say like a highway, that requires more durability than say a parking space like our project, you can use conventional asphalt, but then you can pitch it in such a way that the water runs to either, like you said, some kind of a retention basin or retention ditch, or to say a permeable walkway, a sidewalk made out of permeable concrete. There are multitudes of ways to marry these practices together and to even integrate them into conventional systems.
That you just sparked another idea in my head. Cities, they're now when we get hotter summers with more droughts, city plantings of trees, they start to wilt and you get problems with trying to keep the trees alive. And if you had a system where what runs off of the street goes into, gets channeled into the trees and helps water them, that's another thing that can be done that's beneficial in multiple ways. So there are many ideas here that can be done with this trying to do stormwater management that can benefit, in many different ways.
We're getting to a point where this technology is more accessible, and is, more adaptable, and we're starting to realize that we need to build resilience into our systems. We have to increase those confidence values, if you will.
Valdi, could I make a comment?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, just a couple of things. Any large buildings require, seeker approval, State Environmental Quality Review Act. And that has lots of regulations for stormwater runoff. So don't think that there's nothing there. That's one thing. The other thing is cities, of course, have ordinances, and the city of Binghamton has ordinances about runoff and about trees planting and so forth. So it's not a wide open field.
That's a very good, very, very good point, Dr. Shepard. I wanted to mention during the conversation about farms that buffer strips have been a best management practice for decades, and yes, it's not exactly the wild west.
Well, this is Jim. I have a question.
Sure.
What are the impacts of the use of salt for de-icing roads, and also the herbicides that many of my neighbors use on their lawns?
That goes to salination of waterways. It depends on the specific herbicides, but there can be impacts on the growth of aquatic plants, but it's terrestrial herbicides act differently than aquatic herbicides in many cases. It's hard to speak to. Do they enter the water? Oftentimes, yes. Are some of them degrade by sunlight? Yeah, it's hard to speak to. But in terms of ice melt and road salt, that's certainly been demonstrated as a problem. Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the Upper Susquehanna Coalition and also county soil and water conservation districts have been looking for and sometimes finding places to put upstream retention ponds to slow down the volume and the speed of the water coming off the hillside.
Thank you, Kevin. That's what I was trying to remember with my
I was
buffer
about
strip.
to say it, but I didn't want to think I was reading your mind.
Yeah,
The other thing is that I think farmers, I think, get 100% reimbursement for fencing off their watercourses to keep the animals and livestock out of the watercourse, so they don't have to bear the expense of that fencing. Which is
there are these existing programs through things like conservation districts, USDA, that sort of thing. Thank you. Also, Trees for Tribs. Trees for Tributaries is a great program to establish buffer strips. And I wanted to mention the E.L. Rose Conservancy is on the tail end of a grant, but has been offering compensation for riparian conservation easements through an EPA grant. That's a hard sell to farmers, but it's a program that has exceptionally lasting results.
There's somebody putting in trees along Taylor Road there. I have to track that down. I think it might be your neighbor at the Brick Pond. There's a series of white tubes all along the road that have been talked about recently, and I think there's trees in all of them. It's a lot of trees.
Well, that's fantastic. I like seeing those white tubes.
Yeah. Thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you, Kevin.
There's another chat by Larry Blumberg. Larry, maybe you can just voice it.
Yeah, Chris, we're looking at putting in a concrete driveway to replace an old asphalt driveway. But we live way out in the country. There's large, old farm fields that are now overgrown and transitioning back to woods on all sides of the driveway. So I don't know that storm runoff from the driveway in our case is really an issue. But I also know that producing concrete is very energy intensive. So balancing all that, do you have any design advice for a concrete driveway besides don't do it?
Well, yeah, I might suggest a gravel cell. In terms of making financial suggestions, I'm still learning the pricing and cost of construction. For a project like a driveway, if you wanted to go permeable, it would also involve digging a basin underneath. So I guess it kind of depends in your particular situation, how much excavation you anticipate. If you were just doing conventional concrete, and you would have to compare. Would the environmental benefit of perhaps spending a bit more on a permeable concrete driveway outweigh the costs of generating that concrete? Perhaps, but you also have to look at your setting. What do the roadside drainage ditches look like adjacent to your driveway? Would you be better off trying to shunt some of the drainage from your new driveway into a rain garden before it before it hits the municipal roadside drain? It's a really interesting question, and I think I have more than one answer.
We haven't been able to find contractors that deal with permeable concrete.
Well, that's the other issue is we need to reach a critical mass from a business standpoint in terms of adopting these technologies to make it lucrative for producers. As we work through the bids, I'll let you know who we plan to get it from.
Okay.
I shudder at the thought of getting road salt in permeable concrete. Sounds like a disaster.
The nice thing about permeable systems is they tend to de-ice a lot more rapidly than something impermeable. Snow melts more quickly and just sinks into it. It is plowable, but you have to be careful in terms of keeping that plow lifted. And there are potential problems with clogging if you get a lot of leaves ground up by, like say, a plow. So you have to make sure the surface is either brushed off, swept off, or blown off periodically. Not constantly necessarily, but it needs to be kept up with.
So would the road salt leach out before it caused much freezing and thawing damage?
It depends. In terms of road salt going into that, going through a permeable paver, remember it's going into this basin. So in a typical snowfall or typical thaw, that salinated water is going to percolate through soil and leave a fraction of that salt behind in the soil. And as it percolates further and further and further, it leaves more salt behind and is filtered. As that salt's kind of grabbed by charged soil particles. If it's a very, say, hypothetically, that a lot of salt was captured through that pavement, and then there's a huge discharge event right at the beginning of spring, then we might be looking at flushing some salt down out of that basin.
Well, I'm worried about the salt that is in the concrete that attracts moisture and freezes and thaws and breaks the concrete.
And breaks that up. I'm not sure I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Concrete's not good with a lot of road salt.
Right.
If you look in people's garages and the cement floor of the garage, if it's a very old one, you have all sorts of pits from salt dripping off the fenders and so on.
Okay. That'll be interesting to see, because on one hand I see potential for flushing, as there's snow melt and as there's rain, that's going to get flushed through the material. But then again, yeah, it's a very valid question. What will remain? I guess we'll see.
I was thinking of the past efforts of the government, like when Bixius Creek flooded in well, they built a whole series of check dams upstream. And then there was, at the same time, a big program for farm ponds, not only for water retention, but to have a source of water for fighting fires and lowering cost of insurance for rural areas. Those were both successful programs, I think.
Yeah, I think permeable systems are certainly not a replacement for landscape engineered flood mitigation structure. But it certainly feeds into that system. The more water over a landscape that goes into the ground during a high discharge event, as opposed to running over the surface and into the rivers, is only going to compound in a good way.
What's the hydrological effects of terracing? A lot of countries do a lot of more terracing than we do. Does that help capture the water?
I'm not sure I have expertise there. There wasn't much terracing in the parts of the world that I worked in. It's an interesting question, though.
I think you're correct, though. I believe that that certainly helps because it's going to
Yeah.
slow down what flows down the slope,
Yes.
and
Yep.
when they terrace it, oftentimes they're terracing it to do farming with it,
Yep.
with the water that otherwise would just run down the mountain too. So, yeah, that's a technology that goes back thousands of years. So.
Yeah, and it makes sense just
The-
from
the
the
US
basis of surface area alone.
The US doesn't terrace because we got so much soil, but we do the contour farming and farm around the hill rather than up and down.
Yeah,
Alternate odd strips with row crops, and
Yep.
that's been very successful.
Oh yeah, that certainly decreases erosion and loss of soil to streams. Just farming across the contour rather than down it. Yeah.
yeah, and that reminds me too, not just in our area, but bigger problem even in the Midwest. I forgot what year this was, probably a few years ago now, where they had that massive flooding, and some farms, a substantial portion of their land is now covered with 3 or more feet of silt that is not, rich in organic matter. It's silt, sand, and gravel, and they're not going to have the money to remove that, so they won't be able to farm that land anymore. So, and plus it ruined a lot of infrastructure there as well. So, although that event, there's people are more sparsely, populated in that area. So, the techniques we're talking about here, many of them won't really help the situation much, but
Yeah.
certainly roadsides and things like that, and how you channel runoff from roads, that still matters. And same thing with the farms themselves. If they're like what Robbie just talked about, if they try to change the slope of their farms in some way and maybe build some retention ponds, maybe that might help slow down the runoff to the streams and bigger waterways that cause most of the damage. So this seems like some coordination from the federal level, or at least the state level, would help that situation as well.
Well, they have a lot of contour sod waterways between farmed strips. So the water that does come off gets caught in the sodded waterway instead of running on down the slope.
That's a good idea.
But the thing that bothers me is the yards, the grass, the acres and acres of Broome County fertilized, and the clippings are removed so that you don't build up any thatch. And it's the water that goes through that into the streams must be terrible. And it adds up to many more acres. All of our driveways and roofs adds up to more than the big projects, the schools and the manufacturing facilities and so on.
It's certainly an overlooked issue. My recommendation is to feed as much drainage off of yards as possible into something of a bioretention or something of a wetland. Even if there could be periodical, even municipal bioretentions and on a neighborhood level, that would certainly help use
You
up some
see?
of that nitrogen.
You've seen the tons of bags of fertilizer at Home Depot and Lowe's and all the other stores sitting there ready to be scattered on the lawns, and how much of it will go into the streams and how much will stay in the soil? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a massive problem, and perhaps if we could have somebody come up with a mix of seed to use for especially new developments, and maybe homeowners that care, that want to change the composition of what they have for lawn, rather than having a traditional lawn that's mostly fescue of some sort, to have it be some other mix of things that maybe doesn't grow as tight, maybe doesn't make as much thatch, maybe you don't need to mow it as low or as often. Maybe you could mix in some wildflowers with it as well. And then it brings up the next question. Many communities have ordinances where you can't have, you can't have your lawn be higher than 6 inches. Otherwise, some people can complain and report you. And then, it's just, I mean, you bring up a great point. This management of lawn is kind of nutty. And it's like, what is the point of it? It's like it doesn't help wildlife. It creates pollution, and then people put pesticides and herbicides on it, and then you add that to the runoff, and that pollutes the streams, and it's just like, well, what are we doing here? And it's just, and we spend so much money on it, and now people are paying services to do this as well, and they're not. And some people have multiple homes, so it's not even the spot where they live. It's like where their vacation home, same thing. It's just really nuts.
It's beneficial to robins.
Well,
yeah. Very well.
Right. That's true.
They do proliferate on it. No, I wonder if even within the system, if outreach would be a good idea in terms of helping people determine an appropriate amount of fertilizer. Because if you apply in a ratio that is used and in a way that is used quickly, that theoretically there's less export there. Not that I want to promote it at all, but effective outreach also considers audience and established systems.
And the motors, internal combustion motors, not the electric motors on the lawnmowers, are very inefficient compared to even our cars. And what a polluter they are.
Yeah, there's no pollution control systems on those, so you're correct about that too.
Yeah.
Well, there's some new grasses, buffalo grass, and that grows slower, and it's not as pretty, but it is sod.
I want to point out it's just after 9. We usually like to end things about now, but Valdi, you're in charge, so.
Well, I guess, does anybody have any other comments that they've, been reluctant to, or maybe just didn't have the chance because a few of us were taking up all the airtime? I'm going to stop now. Anybody just jump in if you want to. Okay, I guess I'll take that as a no. So thank you again, Chris, Audette. We really appreciate this very informative talk, and it really sparked a good conversation too, which is fantastic. That shows that you got people thinking, which doesn't always happen. And the other nice thing too is there wasn't any controversy about this either. There wasn't anybody upset that I could tell. So that's nice too. So I appreciate what you're doing with the Waterman Conservation Education Center. You're educating our youth and getting them to care about the environment and to understand how humans affect it and how we rely on it. That's a wonderful thing that you're doing and that the center and the volunteers are doing to help with. And that's the only way we're going to get out of the mess that we're in, is to get more people to care about this. So thank you for that, and thank you for this presentation, and thank you to everybody that attended, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Valdi. It was a pleasure, and that's exactly what we try to do. Present things in as positive and engaging a way as we can, and get people inspired to make a difference.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting information.
You're very welcome. Well, shall I, since I'm the host, shall I go ahead and end it?
Yeah, that'd be fine, Chris, and thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and I will be very happy to come back if you'd like me to.